Hello everybody, this is Chloe at Happy, Healthy, and Homegrown, and today I want to talk to you about how to hatch your own chicks. So before we get started with the hatching ins and outs, let's talk about eggs. No, all eggs are not fertile. You need a rooster to make fertile eggs, and many people only have hens because they only want eating eggs. They don't want hatching eggs. Well, on one hand, that's great. You can also eat eggs if you have a rooster and they're fertile. They are still great for eating. And roosters also do a great job of looking after the hens, looking for the best food for them, and also looking out for predators and protecting them. So roosters are really a great addition to your flock. The morning crow, you can drown it out if you just have a nice fan in your house to sleep with, like we have an air purifier. Anyway, I love roosters, and if you raise them from a small age, they usually are actually more friendly than your hens because they're less shy, so they'll let you hold them. The roosters we've raised from a very young age are extremely friendly and easier to catch than the hens because they're so accustomed to us and unafraid of us. So we're a big fan of roosters. So to start out with, every egg at the grocery store is not fertile, and you can buy fertile eggs at the grocery store and you can hatch them. However, they're not ideal, and I'll tell you why. The reason would be because they've been stored at a cold temperature and you don't know how old they are. So the way you can tell if an egg is fertile is when you crack it open. And of course, once you crack it open, you can't hatch it, but you can start to find out if your eggs are fertile by cracking them open when you're frying your eggs up in the morning. And look at your yolk. If there's a very pronounced bullseye white circle on the yolk, then you know you have a fertile egg. If it's just an irregular white spot, then that's just the hen's DNA. So you'll notice the difference between your eggs when you start to crack them, that some of them are fertile and some of them are not. So if you have a good rooster-hen ratio, like you don't have 30 hens and one rooster, then most of your eggs will probably be fertile if you have maybe a 1-to-10 ratio. Depending on your rooster, I have some roosters that have been very picky about only being interested in one hen at a time, whereas other ones keep the whole flock fertile. So when you look at your egg, if you have a little irregular white dot on the yolk, then it's not fertile. If you have a nice round bullseye white circle on the yolk, that means the rooster and the hen's DNA have combined and you have a fertile, viable egg. So here's the interesting thing about eggs. What happens when a hen rooster and she lays eggs? Do you think that they all are different ages? Because here's what happens. That hen will lay lots of eggs until she feels she has enough to hatch, and then she will start to brood on them. So your eggs actually won't start developing until they've had a constant source of heat for at least 3 days. That's, of course, the right temperature. So when your hen lays a whole bunch of eggs at once, they won't actually start developing until the hen decides to sit on them and go broody. And the same with your eggs you collect from your hens outside that are fertile. If you wait till you get the right number you want and then start them all at the same time, they will all hatch at the exact same time. So the DNA is suspended for an indefinite amount of time there until you decide to hatch. Now, from what I've read, the fertility of an egg goes down by maybe 3% a week, so the older the egg gets. I wouldn't hatch an egg older than 2 weeks old myself. If you hatch the eggs within less than a week, that's the most ideal. So anyway, the point is that just because you have the egg already and it hasn't been incubated, then it won't start developing. Don't ever take eggs from somebody that have already started to develop. It's really not ideal to transport them in the middle of development. So store your eggs with the pointy side down as you're waiting for them to get enough of them to hatch. And then just know that they won't start developing until they've had that constant source of heat for 3 full days. So let's talk about, we'll talk about brooding in just a second. Let me go back to the eggs. Where do you find fertile eggs? So here's the thing. You can, if you already have a hen, go out and buy yourself a rooster from Craigslist that somebody has had too many of. And, make sure it's a friendly rooster that you want to keep. And then you'll have fertile eggs pretty quickly. Once the rooster mates your hen, your eggs are usually going to be fertile for at least a week. So every egg that your hen lays for about a week after they are mated by the rooster will be fertile. So more often than not, your eggs will always be fertile from that point forward, unless you take the rooster out of the mix, and then you will still have fertile eggs for at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. So you're very good chance of having fertile eggs even if you don't see the rooster jumping on the hens all day long. Another thing you can do is buy fertile hatching eggs. You can also find those on Craigslist, people who are selling fertile hatching eggs or baby chicks. They might also have hatching eggs, or anyone selling local eggs might also have a rooster and sell fertile hatching eggs. Or if you buy local eggs and you notice that they're fertile, you could also hatch those. With hatching eggs, you can usually expect to pay about $20 a dozen and then on up, depending on how fancy the breed is. A more specific breed, you might spend $40 to $60 for a dozen hatching eggs, and then a very rare or specialty breed, you might spend as much as $400 for a dozen hatching eggs. So the going price for a barnyard mix of hatching eggs is probably $20 to $25, I would say. If you find them for less, then you've got a great bargain. With hatching eggs, you want to store them with the pointy part down, and you want to store them at room temperature or slightly cooler in a dry climate. So the best way to store eggs for hatching is to not get refrigerated ones. So if you're saving your eggs for hatching, don't put them in the refrigerator. You don't need to refrigerate eggs anyway, but don't put your eggs in the refrigerator, and make sure the pointy sides go down. So back to the hen. When the hen wants to hatch her eggs, she lays a bunch of eggs, and then when she gets the ideal amount in her mind, say with a big fluffy hen, she might lay 12 to 16 eggs before she hatches them. With the smaller hens, she might lay 8. And depending on the breed, some breeds go broody easier than other breeds. So like a silky, if they have 5 or so eggs there, they might get broody and decide to hatch them. So here's one thing when you have hens is if you leave a lot of eggs in the nesting box, then you're more likely to get the hens going broody and wanting to hatch their eggs. There's a couple ways to hatch an egg. You can hatch it with an incubator or with a broody hen, and don't try anything else. I've seen some pretty crazy ways that people try to hatch eggs, and you need to know what you're doing. I would say you can't just take an egg from a hen and just leave it and hope it hatches. So heat lamps won't work for hatching your eggs. It has to be the perfect temperature and the perfect humidity, or the egg won't hatch. The egg will dry out if it's too dry, if it's regular air, and it will die if it's not the exact perfect temperature. So the hen's body temperature is the perfect temperature for hatching an egg, and her own perspiration or humidity from her body is also the perfect moisture for helping the egg to stay viable and not dry out. Now, I live in a very dry climate, so that's a pretty big deal here. I've used many home incubators that are very small, and I've had some issues with eggs drying out, even with a true incubator. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So where you get your fertile eggs from, make sure they're fertile. You can also buy them on eBay and such like that. But the thing about shipped eggs now is when they fly, it can mess with the air sac, all the altitude going through the airplanes. Also, they sometimes may x-ray your eggs, even though it says do not x-ray on the box. They might x-ray your eggs, and that could also kill the viable eggs. So hatching eggs that are shipped, I've done that before, and I don't get quite as good of a hatch rate as fresh eggs from my own farm or somebody locally. So what I've mostly done is try to find local hatching eggs when I've wanted to hatch a specific breed. You look on something besides Facebook or Instagram, because they have lots of funny rules against selling hatching eggs and live animals exchange and livestock and all that. So you won't find any chicks for sale or eggs for sale on Facebook, because they have started banning groups that sell chicks, banning and shutting down groups that exchange livestock for whatever reason. There's another social media app called MeWe that doesn't have all those silly rules if you want to try that one. The other place to find them is Craigslist. You can also join the chicken groups and just look for people who are posting about the kind of chickens you want, and private message them and ask them if they sell hatching eggs. So there's lots of ways you'll start to find out who in your area you can get hatching eggs from. Also ask your friends that have chickens and other people where they get their hatching eggs, or if they know anyone with chickens and a rooster for hatching eggs. You can go with your standard breed, you can go with a bantam breed, a specialty breed, a fancy breed, whatever breed you want, barnyard mix. You just got to make sure there's a rooster involved. And you wouldn't believe how many times people have asked me if roosters lay eggs and if you can hatch a hen's eggs without a rooster and all kinds of crazy things. So, fertility 101. It takes a rooster and a hen to make a fertile egg that's viable for a chick. When there's not both sexes there, there's not a viable embryo. So, you have to have a fertile egg with a nice bullseye on it. Don't crack the egg open if you bought fertile eggs from somebody. Just hope that they told the honest truth and that they had a good fertility rate and within their flock, that their rooster was keeping himself useful. So once you go to hatching eggs, with a broody hen, what you can do is to get your hen to go broody is leave a lot of eggs in the nest for her, and that will trigger her to go broody most likely, unless you have a breed that just really doesn't like to go broody, which a lot of the standard breeds have kind of been bred to be less broody because they lay more eggs. Now you gotta understand that when your hen goes broody, she will try to sit on her nest non-stop, and sometimes you'll see her just sitting there, and when you walk up to get the eggs, she'll go, and she might not have even laid an egg that day. That's because when a hen thinks they're hatching eggs, their body shuts down laying so they don't waste their energy on producing more eggs, because now they're going into mother mode. So they want to hatch those eggs. So hens will go broody even if they're not hatching eggs. It's just part of the good instincts that they have to continue proliferating their species. So when your hen goes broody, if you have a broody hen, it's a great time to go buy some fertile hatching eggs, or if you already have a rooster, leave the eggs under her, or if you don't want her to be broody and you want to hatch them yourself, which is what I usually do, you just kick her out of the nesting box as much as you can. Sometimes I do what's called a broody vacation, where I take it to a whole different coop and put it with a different flock that it's not familiar with, or put it in a different area where it can't access the nesting boxes for a couple days, and that usually helps click them out of broody mode, and then they won't lay usually for another week or two, and then they'll kick back into laying. So there's a lot of chicken psychology here. So with the broody hen, it takes 21 days, no matter what you use, incubator or a hen, to hatch your eggs. It takes 21 days. So a chick will take 21 days to hatch, a duck will take 28 days to hatch. Each one has slightly different depending on species. You can look it up online, but if you're hatching with a broody hen, she may, if she decides like to crawl into a tree or cactus in the corner without you knowing and lay a bunch of eggs and then sit on them, if you have a rooster, you may suddenly be surprised to hear a little peeping in the corner. This has happened to us many times. Some random spot on your outdoors that you didn't expect the hen to find and lay a bunch of eggs. We found a hen hiding under a sunshade crumpled up in a corner in our storage area the other day, and she had a bunch of chicks with her that had just hatched, and we did not notice her there for 3 weeks. So your hen, when she finds her quiet little secret place or her nesting box and has a bunch of eggs under her, she will sit on them faithfully for 21 days. And here's one thing: if you have a broody hen, make sure that they're eating and drinking. I usually bring my broody hen a handful of chicken feed and hold it in front of them. Or what happens too is your chicken will get off the nest when the other ones come in to lay, and they lay on her nest for her, and she'll go out and eat and drink and refresh herself and come back. So just check and make sure that your hen is eating and drinking, because one time we had a hen who was so broody, she forgot to eat and drink for almost a week, and when she got so nutrient depleted, she ate the eggshells off of the viable chicks. So she killed them. And the ones that were not viable, she didn't eat. So she left the rotten eggs and she ate the good ones, the healthy ones. So that was a real big bummer, because they were 2 days from hatching. So make sure your hen is eating, make sure she's drinking, make sure she's healthy. Of course, if she's hiding out in the side and you can't find her anyway, then she's taking care of that. Sometimes they'll leave their eggs for 10 or 15 minutes to eat and drink, and it's okay. They'll come back and they'll warm them again and they'll still be fine. It's amazing. I don't know how it works so well, but it does. If you have other hens around, then they'll take over heating the eggs while the mom is out taking a quick mama break. You'll see when mama takes a break too, she's like in like hurry up mode, like let's go eat, let's go scratch, let's go run around, let's drink some water, and then let's hurry back to our nest. So it's really cool to see. Also, once your mother hen hatches her eggs, she won't lay any eggs for a long time because she's raising her chicks, unless you take the chicks away from her and whatever, do something else with them. But the great thing about letting her raise the chicks is you don't need a heat lamp, and you don't need to worry about like teaching them to eat and drink, because she will cluck, 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 and show them how to do everything. It's very cute. Of course, they do great under a heat lamp as well, but they can't go outside as soon because they have to get their feathers first. If you have a mama hen that hatches out a bunch of chicks, I like to have like a separate cage. Like I have some cages built that are like 4x4 that are only like 2 foot tall. Very inexpensive cages, and it has a little nesting area in it and a little door that opens on the top with some chicken wire for fresh sunshine and air. And so I'll keep the mama hen in that for a while, because what can happen is, and has happened, is hawks will start to spot those little chicks running around outside. And last time in the fall, we had a mama hen that hatched out 12 chicks, and she would take them on all kinds of adventures all over the place. And one hawk started finding us, and it would just come every day and sit on the wall and wait. And mother hen would come out there and cluck, and all the chicks would go run into the vine and push themselves against the vine and hide. But eventually she lost half of her chicks to the hawk, about 6 of them. And not surprisingly, we ended up with all hens. So I guess the roosters must have been a little more outgoing, putting themselves in harm's way a little more. So typical of the male species to be the ones sitting out there in harm's way protecting. But anyway, it was kind of sad to lose them to the hawk, and at the time I did not have a good cage to put the mother and her babies in. I tried a few things, but she kept escaping and wanting to take them on adventures. Anyway, so if you have a mother hen with her babies, you want to have a nice, safe place for her to raise them where the hawks can't find her. Sometimes if she has a lot of chicks, one might get trampled or left out in the cold or something. It's just, chicks are fragile and they're very sturdy at the same time, but you can lose a few. So with the mother hen, she'll do all the work, and when the time comes, she'll have her babies. And just make sure you have some chick starter for those babies. They need a higher protein than just a layer feed. 18 to 20% protein is perfect for laying hens and roosters as well. If you're raising meat birds, they need a higher protein. You can look into that, 20 to 24%. But for regular laying breeds of chickens, it's 18 to 20% protein for the baby chicks. And then of course fresh water. And the mother will need that as well while she's broody. So with an incubator, if you don't have a mother hen that's broody, you don't have chickens at all, you want to raise some chicks, you can get an incubator. Now you can get a cheap incubator at the Tractor Supply or off of OfferUp or Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. You can get one of those incubators for anywhere from $50 to $100. And these are usually just styrofoam containers with a heat regulator. Now what I've found with these is generally the heat will fluctuate and swing a little bit, sometimes even 4 degrees. The challenge with this is that if your incubator gets too hot, you could end up with chicks getting stuck in the shell, developing too fast, hatching out too early, or having twisted feet. That can also come from the humidity being too low. So it's a bit tricky to keep the humidity up in those, because they usually have just a little tiny trough on the bottom to pour the water in. Sometimes if you turn Legos upside down and fill them with water and put them in your incubator, you can get more humidity in your incubator than just the little trough in the bottom. So since we live in a very dry climate, I've done that with those cheap ones, the home ones. And I've had pretty good success with those, although I've had so many it's just heartbreaking to see a chick hatch out with a twisted leg, and usually they don't eat or drink very well, and within a week they often die. If it's just a very slight twisted leg, sometimes they may fully recover if you have firm footing. Sometimes I've seen them with a little bit of a twisted toe, and after a couple days it's straightened out and they're perfect and they're great and they're healthy and they're eating and drinking. Sometimes no matter what you do to try to get them eating and drinking, they just won't. So that's one of the challenges with a less expensive incubator, just keeping the humidity perfect and the temperature perfect. Now the humidity should be 50% or above. I keep my fancy incubator at closer to 65% humidity, and even though they say 45 to 55 for incubation period, it's 65 for hatching. And since I always have a few hatching out, I usually keep it at 65%. Because they do better. Like a lot of times if my water reservoir runs out of water, I will suddenly not have any chicks hatching. That's because they get stuck in their shell. As soon as I fill that water reservoir up again, they'll all start hatching all at the same time because they have enough humidity to break through their shell. So humidity is very important. And then your temperature of your incubator needs to stay right exactly around 100 degrees. So now that I have one that's more commercial, it's got an extremely sensitive regulator that will keep it right around 99.5 to 100 and 100.5 without any variation. Now there's all the candling you can do with eggs and all that stuff. Honestly, I don't recommend going through and hassling your eggs by taking them out of the heat and candling them, because one, they're going to dry out a little bit, and two, they're going to lose their heat. And a lot of times when I've gone through and done all the trouble of candling them, then I'll have another one hatch out with a twisted foot because opening the incubator for that long caused somebody to dry out too much. So I rather just let the non-incubating ones, the non-developing ones, go right alongside the developing ones for the entire time. And at the end, when it's come to the end of their days, if it hasn't hatched, I might give it one extra day, maybe two, but for the most part, it probably won't hatch unless your temperature's really been too low the whole time. More than likely, it won't hatch. So at that time, you can candle it, you can see if it hasn't developed after you've taken it out of the incubator, and you can toss it. You can crack it open if you're really curious, but that can also be very stinky. So my recommendation is not to bother the incubator, the healthy babies, the healthy viable embryos, by disturbing it to candle them all. You just waste the humidity and the heat that's already there, that's keeping the other ones protected. So you will see, if you do go through candling, it is kind of a fascinating process. I've done it a few times, and you'll notice some of them just will still look like it just has an egg yolk in there, just like an egg that hasn't been put in the incubator yet. You can shine a flashlight to it in a dark room and stick the egg on top of your hands, and the light will shine through the flashlight into the egg. Now, if you're hatching one with a super dark eggshell, it's still pretty hard to see what's happening in there. If there's a lot of light coming out of the egg, then it's not developing. If you can see if it's mostly dark, then you know it's developing. But with a dark eggshell, it's just hard to tell. With the light eggshell, you can really see the development in there. You can sometimes even see the chick moving around in the fluid, which is pretty cool. So let your eggs develop at their own pace. And if you're using a home incubator, sometimes it's one of the inexpensive ones anyway. It's a little bit sleepless and stressful, perhaps, trying to make sure the temperature stays perfect and the humidity stays perfect. But what I recommend if you're using one of those is start all your eggs at the same time. Don't keep adding eggs or taking eggs out. Just start them all at the same time. Let them go all the way through to the end with the minimal disturbance. And then you should have a very good hatch rate with no twisted legs. If you keep adding a couple eggs every day and taking a couple out, that's when you're disturbing the humidity and more likely to get leg problems with your chicks. So, can you sex chicks in the egg? Absolutely not. You're gonna get roosters and you're gonna get hens, you're gonna get both. So that's one thing you're gonna have to just count on, is you will have roosters, very likely, unless you're only hatching like 2 eggs and you get really lucky. But you will get roosters. And what do you do with roosters? Well, here's the thing. A lot of the big hatcheries that hatch only hens very likely are either killing the roosters more often than not, or occasionally you'll find a humane hatchery who sells the rooster chicks if they know how to vent sex them, or maybe they donate them, like this one hatchery in California does, to people in the community who are impoverished and who will raise them for food. Ideally, if you have roosters that are standard size, you could raise them as meat birds. Once you know they're a rooster, put them on a higher protein diet, separate them out, and by 3 or 4 months old, you should be able to have them for meat, if you know how to prepare a meat bird. That might be hard for some people to comprehend, but it's way more humane than just giving them no chance and killing them as chicks. They've had a healthy, happy life outdoors in the sunshine, eating bugs, scratching around, then they're going to be a very healthy chicken. Most chickens that are raised for meat birds have a high stress life, no outdoors, and ultimately are not as healthy for you as a human being to consume, especially because they could have even tumors and diseases on them that get processed with the chicken. Our food standard system has only a value for not transferring disease, but they don't have a value for, you know, whether or not you can grind up a tumor and add it into the chicken and call it a healthy meat. It's not. Opt out of factory farmed food and you will be a healthier person. Same thing, raise your own backyard chickens. If you live in an HOA and you can't have roosters, here's what you do. There's usually some feed barns and feed shops around you who will take unwanted roosters to rehome to their customers who want to hatch some eggs. So call around to all the feed stores and ask them if they take roosters. If they don't and you can't find anything, just take a picture of your 4-month-old, 5-month-old rooster and post it on Craigslist for free or for $15. That's usually the going rate for a rooster. And you can sell your rooster or rehome it. I've done that with lots of extra roosters, rehomed them, usually for $15 to $20. Sometimes I've rehomed them for free when I've had too many, or when I've had bantam ones, tiny ones that I wasn't sure if anyone would want. So there's lots of options with roosters. Don't feel like you're stuck just because you're hatching some roosters, and also consider keeping a few. They are really great pets, and if they get used to you at a small age, they really will be great pets. So to recap everything, when you're hatching eggs, you either want a broody hen or a good incubator, and your incubator needs to have humidity readings and temperature readings and a water trough to make sure you have plenty of humidity in there. You want to keep it closed and keep it at 99.5 to 100 degrees for the entire 21 days of hatching. Your humidity should be above 45% and then closer to 65 the last few days towards hatching. Your eggs in your incubator also need to get rotated a couple times a day, so don't hand turn eggs. It's too tedious and it messes up the temperature and humidity. Just get one that already has an egg turner in it and you will save yourself a lot of drama and stress and time. It's really not worth your time to turn eggs unless you're only hatching like 2 of them, which I really wouldn't recommend, because if you have a 50% hatch rate and you only get 1 chick, that chick will be very lonely. Chicks should always have a minimum of 3. Most agricultural places will not sell you less than 3 chicks. Chicks are flock animals, and even though they can be very amazing pets, they also like to be with their kind. So your chickens can be amazingly loving towards you. You can leave on a 2-week vacation and come back, and they won't be mad at you. They'll still be in good condition because they have each other, and they'll be very happy to see you again. They won't be traumatized like maybe your cat or dog would be if you left them for 2 weeks. So make sure you have at least 3 chicks when you hatch them. So that would mean you would want to have at least a minimum of 6 eggs to hatch. I would never recommend hatching less than 6 eggs at a time. It's I think it's cruel to the chicks to have less than 3 chicks. And you know, chicks are also vulnerable. You can lose chicks fairly easily as they grow up. So my ideal suggestion is hatch a minimum of 12 eggs, so you get 6. If 3 of them are roosters, then you have 3 hens left. If 2 of them die while they're growing, you end up with 4 chickens left. You end up with 2 hens if you end up rehoming 2 roosters. So for 12 eggs, you might only end up with 2 full-grown hens. So make sure you hatch plenty of eggs when you go to hatch them, and that they're going to have companions to grow up with. If you want to watch about how to raise baby chicks, check out some of my other video tips for starting baby chicks. And one more little tip that's pretty important if you live in a dry climate like me and your baby chick comes to 21 days old and starts to pip and makes a hole in its egg, give it about 24 hours, and if it has not hatched out of its shell and it's on day 22, you can pick the shell off of it. Now, if the shell is starting to bleed when you pull a little piece off, then leave it alone and don't touch it. Let it sit for another whole day before you pick the shell off of it. But usually by 21 days, it's absorbed the whole yolk. It doesn't have any more blood veins attached to the shell, and you can help it hatch out of its shell because more than likely it dried out in its shell and couldn't get out. But make sure it's already pipped a little bit, and don't help it out until it's already past 21 days and you don't see any blood when you start to pull away the shell. No fluids at all. But I've saved many chicks that have started to dry out in their shells and couldn't get out just by helping to get the shell off, because I do live in a very dry climate and there's a lot of controversy about helping chicks out of shells. You just do it slowly, take a little piece off at a time, make sure there's no fluids coming out, and then when your chick is out of its shell, Just put it under its heat lamp to dry off. And that's an important little tip too. And I wish you all the best with hatching your baby chicks, and I hope you enjoy the process. It's a very special thing to see, to watch baby chicks develop and hatch. So enjoy your baby chicks, and I hope you enjoyed this video. You can subscribe for more great videos on all things health and natural living. Thanks for watching, and this is Chloe.